Hello, and welcome to a general orientation to FIT Special Collections and College Archives. My name is April Callahan, and I am a Special Collections Associate and Curator of the manuscript collections within the department. Today I will tell you a bit more about what we do here and also share with you some of our rare and precious holdings of paper-based objects which date back all the way to the 16th century. First, a bit more about us. FIT Special Collections is a unit within the FIT Library. Because of our title, Special Collections, sometimes people get us confused with the museum at FIT. And while we are in the same building, the museum at FIT holds extant examples of garments, accessories, and textiles, whereas Special Collections hold specifically paper-based objects, including more than 12,000 rare books, more than 650 rare periodical titles, and more than 450 manuscript collections, which contain an estimated 500,000 original works of art on paper, many of which are original designer sketches. Here, you see an image of two of our three secure collections vaults where our materials are stored at 65 degrees and at 45% humidity, as these are the ideal conditions for paper. Not seen here is a third collections vault, which holds the FIT College archives and is comprised of more than 200 linear feet of materials documenting the 75-plus year history of FIT. Our department also houses 7 terabytes of digital assets, which of course are stored digitally. Our collections are cared for by a dedicated staff of 5. Associate Professor Karen Trivet, who serves as the head of Special Collections, myself, April Callahan, Curator of Manuscript Collections, Emily Arbeckel, Curator of Monographs and Periodicals, Samantha Levin, Curator of Digital Assets, and James Ferguson, Cataloging Assistant. Additionally, we have a robust internship and volunteer program. Because of the valuable nature of our collections, patrons are not allowed to browse the shelves of the collection's vaults. Instead, we ask they request specific materials in advance. All of the holdings are listed in the FIT Library's online catalog, and once patrons submit their request, their materials are paged from the vaults and brought to our reading room, which you see here. During the normal semester and under normal operating conditions, we are open to patrons 7 days a week by appointment only. We will provide detailed information at the conclusion of this presentation on how to contact us regarding making a research appointment. On average, we receive more than 1,200 visitors a year. FIT undergraduate and graduate students are only part of our patronage, which also includes class visits from higher education institutions located in NYC and beyond. An international assortment of professional academics working on books and other scholarly pursuits also comprise a segment of our researchers, as do documentary filmmakers and professional fashion and costume designers who come to view our primary sources from periods pertaining to their specific projects. While we collect items pertaining to any of the disciplines offered at FIT, fashion is our strength, as it is the DNA of our school. Our earliest fashion holdings date to the 16th century and run the gamut all the way up until today in the case of rare and valuable items like limited edition publications. Broadly speaking, however, our holdings predate the 1970s. Items from the 1970s up until now, unless especially precious or rare, are kept in the main FIT library. We'll now move on to view a few examples of our holdings on fashion design and history. These two prints depicting menswear styles are separated by approximately 100 years, yet the components of the suit have changed little. This combination of a vest, aka a waistcoat, and pants, here in the form of knee-length breeches, is one of the most enduring silhouettes in the history of fashion, and still remains the foundation of men's business attire today. What differs, however, from suits of the 21st century, in addition to longer trousers, are also the types of materials and colors used. Silks, velvets, metallic embellishments, and floral patterns were not gendered feminine during the 17th and 18th centuries. Bold expressions of color spoke to one's ability to purchase clothing which used the most expensive dyes, and the copious long locks seen here or often courtesy of wigs, which were considered luxury items. The best specimens of this time were made from human hair, just as they are today. These two images are from a French publication called Galerie des Modes et Costumes Françaises, which dates between 1778 and 1787, which is exactly when Marie Antoinette was the Queen of France. In fact, within this series, there's actually an image of her, which is considered to be one of the earliest fashion plates featuring Marie Antoinette. Galerie des Modes was not a fashion magazine proper, but rather little sets of these prints, which are known as fashion plates. And they're called fashion plates because the printmaking technique. Basically, the image that you see here, outlined in the black outlines, was engraved into a steel or copper plate and then printed. The color that you see on the page was entirely applied by hand because color printing did not yet exist in the 18th century. The people who colored these plates were usually women because sitting at home with your children, you could easily hand tint these plates. It was kind of a cottage industry because they could do it at home. One of the most interesting things about Galerie des Modes et Costumes Françaises is at the beginning of the series, the publishers tell you that all of these ensembles were taken from real life. So basically, artists were sketching what women were wearing at this time in the 18th century. And because of that, you can kind of think of Galerie des Modes et Costumes Françaises as an 18th century street style blog. Another interesting fact and why these little prints were very popular is because all clothing at this time, the majority of which was entirely made by hand. So you could take these little prints to your dressmaker or your tailor and say, I want something like this. This is the latest trend. These plates were tremendously expensive at the time. Unlike fashion magazines today, which cost a few dollars, these would have really been purchased by aristocrats and the upper echelons of the bourgeoisie who could afford to purchase something like this, which was considered a luxury item. Here we see two fashion plates from the 1830s and the 1840s. In the menswear plate at left, note how the fashionable color palette has changed. Gone are the bright flamboyant colors men wore during the 17th and 18th centuries. Now somber blues, grays, greens, browns rule the day. This new trend is really taking its cue from traditional styles worn in the English countryside. In this menswear plate, I'd also like to point out the nipped waist of the fashionable silhouette. Some men at this time even wore what were called belts or bands to restrict their waist to achieve this silhouette, and essentially it was really a version of a male corset. And speaking of corsets, the woman at right is a corsetière or a corset maker. During the 19th century, a corset was worn by all women, regardless of class, every day, not only to help shape themselves into the fashionable silhouette, but it was also a matter of propriety. To go without one would have been considered quite shocking at this time. I'd also like to point out her enormous sleeves, which are called gigot sleeves or leg of mutton sleeves. To maintain this volume, some women wore sleeve supporters under their dress, which were these donut-shaped pillows which slipped over their arms and held out their sleeves. Belts and bands, corsets and sleeve supporters, undergarments were essential in creating many of the silhouettes we see throughout the history of fashion. Just as what one wore spoke to one's social standing during the 19th century, so also did manners. As the middle class expanded rapidly in the wake of the French Revolution and also the Industrial Revolution, financial upward mobility was now possible in a way it had never been before. Acceptance into society proper was not only dependent on one's wealth, but also one's ability to navigate the complex codes of etiquette indoctrinated into the upper classes from their time of birth. For this reason, etiquette and beauty manuals became big sellers during the 19th century. Our collection holds a lovely selection of these manuals, which detail not only the finer points of manners and etiquette, but also give beauty, fashion, and relationship advice. At left, we see an early issue of Vogue magazine from 1893, its second year of publication. Far from the glossy version full of fashion photography we know and love today, originally Vogue was a society magazine. It was filled mainly with articles geared towards the American elite, and fashion was only part of its coverage. The images in Vogue at this time were mainly illustrations. Photography certainly existed at this time, but its expense precluded it from the pages of most fashion magazines, even Vogue. Fashion illustration was a thriving career path for illustrators at this time, and at the right you see an original illustration by Carlos Ney from a few years later. As an art form, fashion illustration was modernized during the first decade of the 20th century. Artistic collaborations between the fashion designer Paul Poiret and illustrators Paul Uribe and Georges Lapape in 1908 and 1911 respectively are generally credited for this fresh, new modern take on fashion illustration, which emphasized a mood or lifestyle over line-for-line realism. The image you see here from 1911 uses the pochoir printing technique. Pochoir, which is French for stencil, this image was painstakingly created using dozens of stencils applied in a very specific order to apply gouache to the page by hand. Laborious and costly, the pochoir technique was used for limited edition publications produced by avant-garde designers, artists, and publishers during the first 3 decades of the 20th century. FIT Special Collections holds a world-class collection of some of the rarest luxury publications using this pochoir method. With the turn of the 20th century also came new notions of beauty. As trends in the silhouette of fashionable clothing change over time, so also does the body type perceived to be ideal. The ideal body of the 1920s shifted away from the curves and small waist prized during the 19th century and now embraced the straight up and down garçon or boyish body type with its flat bust and slim hips. A new conceptualization of femininity was born, and many women bobbed their hair in the 1920s in celebration of the newfound freedoms that modern women enjoyed. Dancing was a popular pastime, and fashions of this era often emphasized movement and sparkle. A svelte physique now in vogue, during the 1920s and 30s, increasing numbers of women began participating in sports and physical activities. For the first time, fashion magazines began to encourage women to exercise for fitness. This was a complete reversal from generations prior, when women were oftentimes discouraged from engaging in any sort of physical exertion. With the shift away from the corset, which began in the 19-teens, fashion magazines now advise women that they were responsible for maintaining their own figures via diet and exercise in lieu of corsetry. However, women did still wear foundation garments, such as the comparatively less restrictive styles of girdles seen at left, and needed to create the smooth, sleek lines of 1930s fashions. Two images from our Bergdorf Goodman Custom Salon collection. These two original sketches of designs by Christian Dior and Cristobal Balenciaga evidence the complex relationship between Paris couture and the American fashion industry. For more than 200 years, France had really been seen as the world's arbiter of style, and while Paris set the pace of fashion, the rest of the world copied it. Oftentimes, these copies of Paris designs were illicit knockoffs, which were offered at lower price points. However, many high-end American department stores worked directly with the Paris couturiers to officially license the right to reproduce their designs. This is the case with the Bergdorf Goodman Custom Salon, where women can make an appointment to have a demi-couture version of a Paris design created for them made to measure by Bergdorf Goodman. American women could enjoy the fruits of French fashion without ever having to leave US soil. The museum at FIT holds many examples of the Bergdorf Goodman Custom Salon ensembles, which were licensed with the blessing of the Paris Couture House. So much so that the French designer's label is stitched into the garment right next to the Bergdorf Goodman label. This sketch collection is a valuable primary source on Paris couture during the 1950s and 1960s. As I mentioned earlier, our collection contains more than 650 rare periodical titles and holds fashion and design magazines from around the world. Publications in English, French, German, and Spanish abound. Some of my favorites include rare Czech fashion magazines from the 1940s, Cuban fashion publications from the 1890s, and the French fashion magazine you see here, Femme Chic, which features beautiful fashion photography. This title is difficult to find outside of France. While our collection contains a wealth of international sources, the strength of our collection is American women's fashion, particularly New York fashion. Seen here are two items from our Halston manuscript collection, an original millinery sketch and a fashion runway photograph. Generally speaking, our manuscript collections contain unpublished materials, and many of our manuscript collections can be considered quote-unquote designer archives. These are archives oftentimes compiled by the designers themselves and provide detailed information on their careers. From sketches to photographs, correspondence, press, scrapbooks, the holdings of our manuscript collections are often unique to FIT, not to be found anywhere else in the world. Born Roy Halston Frowick in Iowa in 1932, Halston, as he was known professionally, was a bona fide celebrity during the 1970s and 80s. Part of the Studio 54 crowd and friends with the likes of Liza Minnelli and Andy Warhol, Halston began his career as a milliner, and his draped jersey creations later came to epitomize the minimalist chic ethos of American fashion. Many of the models Halston regularly worked with were considered the supermodels of the day, including Pat Cleveland, Karen Bjornson, and Alva Chin, who is seen at right. These two images are the work of photographer Jamel Shabazz. Growing up in Harlem and the Bronx, as a teenager, Shabazz captured the birth of hip-hop style while teaching himself the art of photography. His subject were his friends and neighbors, and Shabazz soon became known for his specific candid style of street photography. Now sought after to bring his retro feel to ad campaigns by the likes of Keds and Adidas, Shabazz continues to seek out his models from individuals he meets on the street. Gifted to us by Shabazz himself, this collection is an important representation of early street-style photography. Our collection contains materials which support many of the various design majors offered at FIT, including accessory design. We will now see a few examples of our wonderful holdings of materials on the subject of millinery, shoe, and jewelry design. For well over a century, the top hat was a menswear fashion staple. And while we are all familiar with what a top hat looks like, did you know that the fashionable silhouette of top hats changed greatly over the course of more than 100 years? The variations of short, tall, tapered top hats with either curved or flat brims marked specific eras and undoubtedly fueled the market for newer, more fashionable models. The top hat is also an unexpected player in the history of animal rights. Prior to the 1860s, the finest top hats were made from felted beaver fur, but as demand for beaver fur hats increased with the rise of the middle class during the 19th century, the world's beaver population became endangered. Around this time, silk began to be used as a luxury substitute. A close examination of the top hats seen on the right-hand side reveal a sheen to them, marking them as silk top hats rather than beaver felt. These two images come from the French fashion magazine Le Mode, which was one of the first fashion magazines to convert entirely to photography during the 19 teens. The teens were also one of the great heydays of millinery design, with wide, platter brim hats that could span up to 3 feet in width, not to mention the era's penchant for using feathers. Rare feathers sourced from exotic locales could cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, and were worn almost like one wears jewelry today. Again, like the beaver we discussed just moments ago, the prices commanded for feathers of certain bird species drove many of them near the brink of extinction, if not to extinction outright. Some of the earliest animal rights organizations, including the Audubon Society, were formed in the early 20th century to protect animals from being overhunted for use in the fashion industries. These wonderfully whimsical original sketches are the work of legendary footwear designer Arshio Boxerian. Over the course of her career, Boxerian designed shoes for Christian Dior and high-end luxury American brands, including I. Miller and Stuart Weitzman. The Arshio Boxerian manuscript collection served as the main resource for FIT author Helene Varine's 2019 book, Arshio Boxerian, A Life in Shoes. These exquisitely rendered sketches depict the designs of American jeweler Seymour Moss. After serving in the Army during World War II, Moss returned to New York City and founded MoBA, which produced gold and gemstone high-fashion jewelry that retailed in high-end department stores such as Saks Fifth Avenue and Neiman Marcus. Moss spent a great deal of time in Italy working with enamel artisans and is widely credited with introducing Italian enameling techniques into the American jewelry market. FIT offers programs in cosmetics and fragrance marketing to both undergraduates and graduate students already professionally working in the industry. Some of our holdings on perfume in particular date back to the 18th century during the reign of Marie Antoinette, and even provide detailed recipes for scents popular at that time. Let's take a look at just a handful of our other holdings pertaining to the beauty industry. In addition to our extensive collection of etiquette manuals, we have quite a few historic beauty manuals. At left, you see the graphic embossed on the cover of the 1901 book, Beauty's Aids or How to Be Beautiful. Oftentimes, the recommended beauty preparations or treatments can seem a tad comical to us today, as in the case with the image at right from the DuBarry Success Course from 1947. A 6-week mail-order makeover produced by the DuBarry Cosmetics Company to promote the use of their products, the course incorporated rigorous dieting, daily calisthenics, and beauty rituals. Central to their recommended beauty routine is this, the beauty angle, wherein it was recommended women recline with their feet raised above their head for at least 1 hour a day. The rationale was that blood flowing to the face nourished one's complexion. When it comes to cosmetics, the product itself is only one factor that goes into its design. Perhaps more so than any other industry, packaging plays a significant role in marketing cosmetics. On the left, you see an image from an exceptionally rare catalog for Rosine Perfumes and Cosmetics. Rosine was one of a trio of businesses owned by couturier Paul Paré, who I mentioned earlier in the context of modern fashion illustration. He also owned Martine, an interior design studio and retail business, as well as the cosmetics company Rosine. Both of these businesses were named after his 2 young daughters. Paré frequently relied on Martine to design the packaging for Rosine products. He was one of the first fashion designers to launch a signature fragrance during the 19-teens and is a significant figure in the history of lifestyle branding. With his couture house, cosmetics and fragrance company, and his interior design business, he was one of the first fashion designers to create an immersive experience into his brand. On the right, we see an ad from Adam, a menswear magazine from 1950. We know immediately that this is for a Chanel product, but closer inspection proves it to be not for a fragrance, as one might assume, but rather tanning oil. In this photo, we see the interior of a cosmetics factory, sometime around 1925. The workers are surrounded by tables of fresh flowers, destined to be used in their products. At the center stands cosmetics maven Helena Rubinstein, who went on to become one of the wealthiest women in the world, thanks to her business acumen. Her cosmetics company, Helena Rubinstein, was one of the most successful in the world during the first half of the 20th century. Rubinstein put her fortune to good use collecting modern and African art and became one of the most significant art collectors of her era. Her life and art collection have been the subject of numerous museum exhibitions in recent years. Our holdings are not limited to fashion. We have a wide variety of primary sources which are pertinent to the fields of printmaking, graphic, surface, and textile design. We will look at a few now. Both of these images were created using the pochoir stencil technique I referenced earlier. Consider the care that went into the registration of the stencils, used in a specific sequence, that went into creating each of these exquisite images. Each color you see here required at least one unique stencil, and for complicated images, oftentimes many more. As a printmaking technique, pochoir is rarely practiced these days at this high level of expertise. Only a handful of studios dedicated to this printmaking technique remain in operation today. Our rare pochoir holdings are an important record of this dying art form. The image on the left is clearly a fashion illustration. On the right, a plate from one of the several dozens of albums of design and ornament in our collection. Largely predating the 1930s, these albums were meant to serve as inspirations to surface, textile, and wallpaper designers who were free to copy the motifs or colorways that these albums contained. Oftentimes, these albums were thematic, perhaps containing only geometric, animal, or floral motifs. The image you see on the left comes from an exhibition catalog for the Exposition Internationale des Arts Décoratifs, which was held in Paris in 1925. The style which permeated this internationally significant design expo is what we now know as quote-unquote Art Deco. This expo was just one of the many international expositions put on different cities all around the world during the 19th and early 20th centuries, the purpose of which was to put on display the latest innovations in the field of industry, technology, and design. These types of quote-unquote world fairs were extremely popular, attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors from around the world during their temporary runs. Our collection contains many of the exhibition catalogs produced by these world fairs, which were sold to attendees just as museum catalogs are today. On the right, you see a reproduction of some cutting-edge graphic design from the 1930s, which owes much of its look to the evolution of the Art Deco aesthetic. We will now look at a few examples of items held in the FIT College archives, which collectively is more than 200 linear feet of materials documenting the pedagogical and business activity of FIT. FIT opened in 1944 with 100 students and was located on the top two floors of the High School of the Needle Trades. Soon, supporters wanted to bring greater prestige to the industry by having the institute become a college with the authority to confer degrees. Industrialists and educators decided on two main majors: design, with programs in apparel, millinery, and textiles, and scientific management, which largely focused on the technology aspects of these design industries. The curriculum also included liberal arts. In 1951, 3 years after the State University of New York had been established and the state law had provided for the creation of community colleges, FIT became the second SUNY community college empowered to grant the Applied Science Associate's degree. By then, there were 400 day students and about 1,000 evening students. Here you see a page from the first FIT yearbook with photos of the class of 1948. The text in the yearbook is entirely handwritten, and as far as we know, there is only one extant copy of this yearbook. At right, you see an early design incarnation of a seal created for FIT. By the early 1970s, the number of majors offered at FIT had grown exponentially. At left, you see FIT students holding signs representing their majors in advertising, fashion management and administration, fashion, textile, and retail design, as well as photography and illustration. This concludes our presentation. We hope you have enjoyed getting to know a bit about the types of resources we hold in our collection. If you have questions or would like more information on how to make an in-person research appointment, you can contact us by phone at 212-217-4385, or you can email us at fitlibsparc@fitnyc.edu. More general information about our unit can be found on our website, which is fitnyc.edu/library/SPARC, and that's spelled SPARC. You can also find a selection of our digital holdings on our SPARC digital platform, and we hope you consider following us on Instagram at FIT Special Collections. Thank you very much.